Well, my name is Kendall McDonald, and I'm the lead pastor at Fredonia Baptist Church in Nacogdoches. And a little bit about just kind of our church and our history. Our church is an old church, 90-year-old church that historically has really believed in college ministry, and that's ebbed and flowed through the years of what that's meant. I was brought in 2011 as the college pastor, and so that's when my family and I moved to Nacogdoches. Nacogdoches, East Texas. You can say it, but you cannot spell it, I promise. So came in 2011, and then in 2018 became the lead pastor. Our pastor at the time planted a church in Fort Worth, and so I took over as the lead. And during my time as college pastor, John and his wife Melina were some of my students. And our church is for our area, we're a medium to large size church. We're squarely in the mediums if you take in communities like Calais and Fort Worth area. But we got 500-600 on a Sunday morning, kind of a blue collar church. We've got, you can see there, 23 staff and elders. So it just kind of gives you an idea of our context. So.
Yeah. So we're going to really be talking about dynamic between the relationship with the pastor and the college pastor. And so hopefully you're in this room because that's something you're passionate about and want to think through. We're going to try to guide that conversation a little bit. So John, I'm a former SFA student, and so I'm an alumni of the campus that I serve at, which is a story for another day. But I think one of the interesting things about this conversation of how it relates to y'all is you all get to hear perspectives from a couple different angles. So as a college pastor, working with a lead pastor, and this was my first real ministry job, and so I've kind of grown up in this church, and if y'all have been college pastors long enough, you kind of know like there is some growing up that you do, and so I can also talk about that transition. But I think also because Kendall was able to be a college pastor, then transition to a lead pastor, he understands it from both sides of the aisle, and so hopefully our conversation today brings about some dialogue that we can begin to kind of work through those things together. Yeah.
We're going to be primarily, we got some volunteers in the room. I know you're wearing several hats at your church, and you guys are students, but we're primarily going to be talking from a collegiate pastor perspective. Okay, so I'm not trying to say here's what your lead pastor should do. Okay, so make sure we contextualize that. There will be a lot of contextualization you'll need to do depending on the size church you're in, depending on the scenario that you're in. There may be times when I say, hey, this is a conversation you have with your lead pastor. But if you're 2 or 3 spots away from your lead pastor on your org chart, it may not be the appropriate conversation with them. You need to think through probably more direct report in that scenario. So you'll have to do some contextualization. But overall, we think this is a really important conversation. How to have a healthy relationship with your lead pastor is really important. And I was thinking, okay, where in Scripture do we really get the push for this kind of relationship and health in this? And I want to read you just a little bit from Ephesians chapter 4. It says in verse 2, well, actually, I'll back up into 1. Paul says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And so there is a personal responsibility that each one of us have he says, to be eager with humility, gentleness, patience, that we should be bearing with one another. And so we have a personal responsibility in that relationship to create peace and harmony. And further down, it's not very far away in verse 15. He says, speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. So here's kind of our premise. There's personal responsibility there. And in the room, we just want to encourage you to be proactive in creating that peace, that harmony, and those healthy relationships. But also know that this matters as it relates to the church as a whole. He's clearly, Paul is saying here that as each part functions properly, and as we honor one another and build one another up and seek for peace, that's the very environment in which the body grows itself up in love. And so your relationship with your lead pastor actually matters as it relates to the whole and the health of the church. There's a lot at stake here. Sure. And so we just want to encourage you. This is really kind of our of the breakout. To help you take a proactive approach to strengthening the relationship between you and your lead pastor. We think it's going to be helpful to you personally in the relationship between the two of you, and then also it's going to matter in the life of your church.
Yeah, I want to tell a story to highlight that with a little bit of grainy.
We don't know why this happened.
I don't. It was perfect on my screen. Now it looks like my flip phone took it. Which you would see a great photo of Corbin there. So here's what I think. I think a dynamic relationship between a college pastor and a lead pastor is actually great for your city, for your campus, and for your church. So you'll have a better impact in your city, you'll have a higher impact on your campus, and just in general, like the church harmony and the impact your church has will increase. And I want to tell you a quick story about that. So Corbin is a guy who is the senior marketing guy at SFA. Like, he is the guy, and he reports to the president. And one of the things that he kept hearing in meetings over and over again was this idea that college students, all they need is Wi-Fi because they're just going to play games and hang out in the room all day. And everyone he was talking to and the student, as far as staff and faculty, was in agreement, and they weren't doing anything other than just feeding that addiction, right? And he actually became, he goes to our church. He's an adult leader that got connected to one of our home groups, very much like y'all in the back. He got connected in one of our home groups. And in the midst of doing this for the last year, his whole perception changed on students. And he said, actually, they're craving community, like they're desperate for relationships. And so now it's taking what he's learned from that and going back to SFA and then changing the structural elements at SFA so that we begin to emphasize relationship on our campus more than just good Wi-Fi. And why do I say that? Well, because when you often think about the relationship between a pastor and a college pastor and a lead pastor, you really just think about it in regards to the two entities getting along or something along those lines. I would challenge you to think that this relationship plays itself out in a lot of different contexts. If I wasn't collaborating with him, I probably wouldn't have multi-generational investment. If I didn't have multi-generational investment, Corbin doesn't get brought into the story, and the lives of my students don't change, and Corbin's place of work doesn't change. Now, it just happens to be SFA. But we think all of that is traced back to the idea of a healthy relationship and the potential impact that can happen when y'all are working in harmony together. And so I think that's really important to understand that. So within this conversation, one of the things that I've done, and I'll kind of go to the next slide here. One of the things that we've done is we really want to help you take a proactive approach to strengthen your relationship and help move the needle. But one of the things we've noticed that there are a couple pressure points that happen in the relationship between a college pastor and a lead pastor. I've reached out to a fair amount of my colleagues who are college pastors and began to just ask them a couple different questions and did a little research here. On top of that, I've reflected on my own experience, and Kendall and I spoke from his experience and my experience. And these are the 4 pressure points that we've kind of come up with. These aren't just ones we've come up with out of the air. These are ones that were proven throughout the entire time. And so you need to be having these kind of conversations with your lead pastor, particularly in regards to collaboration, leadership development, vision implementation, and value. So let's talk about collaboration first.
Yeah, and we're going to have some Q&A in this too, because we know that it probably would be helpful to interact with your specific situation. So don't let us miss anything. If you've got questions, we certainly want to ask those, and then we'll get to that time also at the end. We'll try to do a fair amount of those.
For sure. That's super important. We want to do that.
Yeah, we'll leave time for that. So collaboration is kind of the first pressure point. The question is often, how much collaboration should I have with my lead pastor? And then how is that collaboration initiated? And most of the time, I think, and I remember going through this, but most of the time, the expectation is that collaboration is supposed to be initiated from the top down. So my lead pastor or whoever my direct report is, they're supposed to come to me and say, hey, let's work on this together. And that collaboration gets initiated that way. And while that is certainly possible and maybe routine in your environment, a thing that we think is often missed is collaboration with your lead pastor that happens from you taking initiative to seek that out. And we would say to you that the healthy relationship, a building block of the healthy relationship between a collegiate pastor and a lead pastor, is when that collegiate pastor is taking initiative to collaborate. And so there's lots of different ways that you can do that. But by doing that, by reaching up to seek out collaboration, even if collaboration is more in the world of leadership development. Hey, I'm trying to solve this problem, or I've got this student that is going through this. What's your perspective here? How would you counsel this student that's going through this? You are inviting collaboration from the lead pastor. A lot of times the lead pastor is not going to know where those needs are unless that's initiated by you. And so that you being proactive in collaboration is pretty critical. And John has an interesting, I think, just perspective on that as he kind of learned what that needed to look like.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think that one of the first things we need to say about collaboration is when we're talking about this conversation, we're absolutely talking about it in the context of college pastor and lead pastor. But I think in this room, there's a couple different ways this can be contextualized. So perhaps in your church, your direct report is your lead pastor. Well, this would make sense. Well, perhaps your direct report is more of like a discipleship pastor or an executive pastor. Well, then contextualize that to whatever is your context. And we're going to work through that. But I also think for a couple of y'all, like this is you talking to your college pastor. And so we're gonna talk about ideas and principles of what collaboration looks like between lead pastor and college pastor. But those same ideas, if taken and thought about individual scenarios, can be applied whether you're a student or a volunteer. So I just want you to have that in the back of your mind. But I'll tell you a little bit. For me, my first ministry job was at Fredonia Hill, and so I stepped right into ministry, and I was full of ambition and you know, this is the young guy, he's got to grow up. And what I struggled with was the idea of collaborating because, you know, you feel the need to prove yourself. You feel the need to show that, like, I can do this. You don't have to come alongside. Like, just trust me with it. And collaboration, and rather than seeing it as something that's enhancing, you feel it as like a power grab, like they're trying to take something away from you. And that's just not the case of it at all. And I had to begin to shift my mindset that, like, no, we're actually going to be stronger when we begin to work together. And when that mindset happens, it happens one from challenge, but it also happens just when you begin to integrate with different departments in your church staff and beginning to value, okay, I think you'd be a good person to bring in here. You'd be a good person to bring in here. And so I remember I got that challenge from him to, like, that we need to think a little bit more together and not view it as a lack of trust or lack of empowerment, but also realizing the value that he would bring to the table in that. And I had to change my whole perception that collaboration was actually a healthy thing, which I just think needs to be the first thing we say. Because in our minds, we actually think collaboration is what's best for us to reach our city campus, or is it something that we just get told might be helpful, but we don't actually trust them in the room. And so I think we have to check our mindset a little bit at the beginning of that.
Collaboration is also going to look different depending on your stage of leadership development. For John, you know, some of our earliest conversations when he was right out of the gate, starting out in ministry, collaboration wasn't, hey, let's do this event together. Collaboration was really me doing a lot of leadership development with him. Here's what it looks like to communicate. Here's what it looks like to organize a meeting that has staff and volunteers in it. And here's how you do that effectively. How many times should you be meeting with your lead team, with your adults? Here's how to organize home groups. And we were talking through those things. So it may not have felt like collaboration like we normally think about. Let's do this event and you'll teach this session and you teach this session. But collaboration was a lot of hands-on leadership development. And that will grow and change as you continue to grow and change as a leader. We do less of that now. I'm much less in the details of his role. And now collaboration is kind of more on a strategic level. And so it will shift and change, but make it a priority. Make receiving that perspective a priority. The second one that's often a pressure point is leadership development, and really it's more, what should I expect from my lead pastor as it relates to my leadership development. And here's what I've found: oftentimes it works. This works like a marriage. If you've married in here, you can maybe know what I'm saying here, but we expect our spouse to intuitively know what it is that we need or what we want. And then we expect our spouse to meet that need in the way that we want them to meet that need. And very rarely do we communicate either of those things. But so we have an expectation that there's the ability to have that intuition and then meet the need the way that I want it met. The problem with that is that it lacks the communication necessary to clearly articulate that need. And then it also lacks the insight to know that the way in which my spouse may meet that need is going to have a lot to do with her giftings, with her personality, with who she is. It's going to be shaped around that. And I think we do that a lot within the work world. I think we do that a lot in our relationship with our lead pastor. If you've got a lead pastor or a direct report that is a real strategic, visionary, type A sort of leader, then the way in which you're going to receive development is going to look that way. It's going to take that sort of shape. They are probably going to be developing your ability to do those things. They're going to be investing in you in that way. The other side of the coin is if your lead pastor is Eugene Peterson, a very contemplative, for those of you a very contemplative pastor, then leadership development might look a lot more like pastoral soul care. Leadership development might look like, he goes to lunch with you or coffee, or you sit in his office and chat, and he's curious about what's going on in your life, and he's wanting to reflect on things spiritually. And you may be thinking in that room, why are we talking about my quiet time? I really need to know how to lead a meeting. And he thinks that he's investing in you because that's his natural giftings. So here's what I would say in terms of leadership development. Again, this is kind of aimed at the college pastor. But first of all, get to know his giftings. Understand who your lead pastor is so that you are more ready and able to identify the ways in which you're being invested in. Number two, put yourself in a position to be developed with clear communication. Communication is going to be key here. Here's an example. Instead of just assuming that he knows what you need, say something like, hey, I'm looking for where I could have some further conversation to help me develop as a leader, especially as it relates to my leading of a team of volunteers. See, that's really specific. I want to grow in this area, and I've been very specific. Follow that up with, is that something that we could take some time and talk about? Or would you recommend that I talk to another person or explore another resource? See, what you've done there is you have put the ball in his court. You've clearly articulated what you're looking for. And now that allows for him to think through and process, hey, is that something that I can give to you? Maybe me spending 20 minutes will help. If that's not an area that he feels particularly strong in, he might say, hey, you need to go talk to so-and-so, maybe an elder or a deacon, another staff member, maybe a member of your church. Or let's read this together. Here's a great resource. Let's read this together and then let's talk about it. Because you've given a specific request, now you've enabled them to really invest in you. And then here's the last thing I would say from a leadership perspective on this. There is nothing worse than somebody coming and say, hey, I really want to grow in this area. And then you give them feedback on how to grow and they don't implement anything that you said. They don't even try to do anything that you said. So if your lead pastor says, hey, read this book and then let's have a conversation about it, don't not read the book. You got to read the book. Even if you don't want to, read the book and show up ready to talk about it. Because now what you've proven is, I really am hungry to be invested. I value what you have to say. And whether the book matters to you at all or not, you've now created the possibility for there to be continued leadership development. So be specific in your communication and do what they think is best in that situation.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate that, those kind of that principle of communication in a very clear way and what does leadership development need to look like can happen in an array of different contexts. And so whatever that relationship might look like, whether that's your pastor or whatever, like you can have that conversation in that regard. But one of the things that he mentioned, and I just want to elaborate on a little bit more, is embracing and valuing the giftings that your lead pastor has, and really championing those. So rather than being critical about shortcomings or comparing, let's just be totally honest, like the college pastor can often compare his giftings to the lead pastor. And what that doesn't do is it doesn't set us up, as Paul would say, to strive side by side together for the sake of the gospel. That puts us at odds against one another. And if we're stronger together, then we have to strive side by side. And so one of the first things we have to check is that little voice inside of our head of like, do you think you could do it better? Are you better? Do you feel like you could do this better? Do you feel like you're a more effective communicator than this? And what that creates is this view inside your mind where you now don't value him, and then you get frustrated at him not valuing you, and so now this system's just going nowhere. And I would really just say, like, you got to check your ego. You got to humbly come before the Lord. Like if you're struggling with your lead pastor, I'll just put it like this: one of the first things you should do is in prayer, ask God, Psalm 139. Search my heart and try me and know my thoughts. Like, lead me in the way of the everlasting. Like, is there something within me that's actually full of, I've been saying hurt, but it's really just pride. And it's blinding my eyes. And this happens in all kinds of scenarios. And so I think that's one of the first things we have to do is learning to embrace and value the giftings of your lead pastor. And I've learned to do that in a lot of different ways. I think you can learn to do it in the subtle ways, in the way you interact with him Monday through Friday during the week, in the way he interacts during a staff meeting. When he sends out small, subtle things that you really don't care about, but you know they're important to him. Like, you do those things as a way of communicating that you value the things that he values, and not devaluing him or being critical towards him. I'll say particularly we need to guard that in regards to his opinion of college ministry or his ability to communicate with college ministry, because we would often think of ourselves as the experts on those things, being the college minister. But checking that on the door and actually coming and bringing these conversations with him of what you think is effective, and then giving him the opportunity to implement and give some leadership development in there, on which I would just say, like, you should be pursuing leadership development from your pastor. That'd be really helpful. But he said that other way, he will give it to you in a way that's natural for him. So if it's natural for him to be the CEO kind, he's going to give it CEO. But it's natural for him to be grandpa, like he just wants to talk about your day, soul care, how's your marriage? He's going to give it to you that way. But don't be upset with him for not giving you leadership development. He's probably just giving it to you in the way that's most natural for him. And so if you feel neglected in one of those areas, just communicate with him. Man, I'm looking to have these types of conversations. Where can I do that? And I think Kendall mentioned those types of things. And so that's leadership development.
Do we want to stop
Yeah.
on these first two before we jump into vision, implementation, and value? Just any questions before we keep rolling?
I'm curious how you do this, like, practically, because we have like a staff meeting, and like it has it in the staff meeting, like, as the whole group, but we all have different specific ministry. We could communicate about what's going on,
Sure.
but it's not really tailored to each individual person. Like, it'll be a general, don't learn about how to lead a meeting or how to organize a funding budget thing. Like, it's helpful, but it's not tailored to our specific area.
Sure.
And I'm curious, I love that idea, but how do y'all do that practically? Like, is it one-on-one meetings, or how do y'all do that, like, yourselves?
Yeah, for us, it takes place in one-on-one meetings with direct reports for the most part. There's not tons of there's not individual leadership development that's happening within a staff context. Normally, so that aside, that takes place in individual meetings. And different churches operate differently in terms of the rhythms of those meetings, how often you get those, who those are with. Those would be the scenarios where I would say that specific question related to your leadership development would need to come up. That's where you're going to get that feedback. That's where you need to be proactive and ready to kind of say, hey, help me solve this problem. Help me, grow as a coordinator of volunteers or whatever it is. That's where that would take place. And that's where that happens, Brock?
Yeah, so he's my direct report. So he sends out a little like survey to me 7 days in advance and asks me a couple different questions. And on that, he'll say like, how are your, what are the 3 biggest things you're working on? What problems are you trying to solve? Where are you struggling? You used part of, I remember the exact phrase. But then there's a second part that's like, how are your relationship with your family? How's your relationship with God? And then he's like, hey, is there anything else in your life that you feel like we should talk about that we're not talking about? Like, and which I think just becomes the catch-all. But I think what ends up happening is that during our meetings, he's looking at what problems are you trying to solve? And he's joining me saying, okay, well, let's get to work at it. Like, let's work on these problems together. And so I've now brought to the meeting things I want his input on. And so maybe your system looks different, but you're bringing to the meeting the things that you need either coaching or advice or input on that are rather specific. And so you're not waiting for him to create the agenda of leadership development, but you're bringing that question to him, which is where I would say that's where that fits for what you're trying to say.
Absolutely. The one-on-ones, this is where you just, whoever your naturals with, that be your lead pastor or an executive pastor, that's where you just say, hey, can we grab 10 minutes? I've just got some questions I'd love to hear your perspective on. And you put the question in front of them if there's not a routine meeting, and then see where that goes.
Yeah, and that's normally received pretty well. Let's talk a little bit about vision implementation, unless we had any more questions y'all wanted to add up about that.
Any more questions?
All right, we'll talk on.
Coming from the college perspective, I recognize that, lead pastors, they deal with a lot, and they got a lot on their plate. Sure, they got their direct reports, but then they also have plenty of other people wanting to vie for the time. And so we're just curious, like, what would you say in terms of, like, the college minister coming and saying, like, hey, I want some more of your time, knowing you probably don't have a ton of it as is. And I guess I would say, like, you mentioned survey thing. I think the most we've ever had is the year-end review, that we each get the same thing and we both fill out what we think. Like, I fill out what I think, he fills out what he thinks for me, and then we compare notes at the end of it. And well, if I'm being honest, like there is no purposeful one-on-one that goes on. There's the ministry team meeting, there's the all staff meeting. It's just kind of like I trust you to do your thing, go do it, and then at the end of the year we'll talk. And so anyway, maybe that's a twofold question, but anyway, if y'all can speak anything to that, because
just real quick, I would just say don't over worry about occupying time. I think that's don't let them guard their time. You don't have to do that. Don't assume. Hopefully they have boundaries and routines and structures to do that. As a lead pastor, I want to know when my people have questions and want to talk about things. So I would give them the benefit of the doubt in that. You may be in a system where you have to do a little bit more initiating. It sounds like if that's the case, and if that lead pastor is the person that would naturally be that person to do that, you may just have to be the one that says, man, it would be really great if once a quarter maybe we could sit down. I've got some things I'd love your perspective on. Is that a time we could create, or what do you think might be best? Here's the 2 or 3 things I would love your input on, and then let them kind of shape how that time looks. But don't worry about being a pest. Don't get offended don't get offended too if they say, those are great questions. Why don't you have a conversation with so and so about that? He just thinks that's going to give you the best.
Right. Yeah.
The best opportunity to grow in the area that you're asking to grow in. So that's not a value thing either. So on both sides of that, it's good. It's great.
Yeah, and I can speak on behalf of that. Like, I've brought questions to him before, and he's redirected me to different people on our staff team, and it wasn't like he doesn't want to answer it. It was like he genuinely thought the best way to answer the solution was to go and talk to this person.
And often that's because there's somebody that can do a better job than I can do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about vision implementation. Keep coming up with these questions. I want this to be highly practical for you in your scenario. And so contextualize your scenario, and then let's go from there. So vision implementation. Now, one of the things that I think that I had to experience in my own journey was, for a while there, I was doing college ministry. College ministry was good. It was healthy. We were growing. But if I was being totally honest, I had a trajectory of where college ministry needs to go. and it didn't really, wasn't thinking about how that relates to where our church's trajectory and where our church is trying to go. I was kind of running two different lanes. I'm running my lane, church is running in its lane. And one of the things that Kendall came to me, he said, like, hey, I need you to think bigger than college. Like, you have to quit thinking just college. And you've got to actually begin to start thinking church-wide. Think about college, but you got to think about college in the context of church-wide and where we're going. And so for me, what had to happen was that I had to move our vision and our language, because I had not like printed out, here's vision of our college ministry, but I was unofficially using vision and using language that was contrary to our church's vision language.
Contrary is probably not right.
Contrary is not the right word.
It's just different.
Yeah, different. That's better. Yeah, I wasn't like, forget that. I don't want to do that. It was just different. And it kind of showed a slight difference in values. And one of the things that I had to do is scrap all of that, implement a church's vision into my college ministry, and then begin to communicate the actions of the college ministry to the lead pastor in the verbiage and in the words of the church's vision statement. So what I'm doing then is I'm now valuing what he has taken and what he's made, maybe with elders, maybe with deacons, whoever, but like he's made this vision statement. And now I'm taking and contextualizing this world that he's not in on a day-to-day basis, and I'm giving it back to him in the words so that he's now seeing that what he desires to be true, what the leaders of the church desire to be true for across the entire church, I can now communicate back to him and say this actually is happening. And so now vision implementation, I think, is a huge thing that should be happening. And I'll just tell you this, except in really rare, and these are very few and far between scenarios, your college ministry should not have a different vision statement than the rest of your church. And I think the reason is like, you need to have side by side working together on the same goal, and that vision statement and communicating in that vision statement help accomplish that. And so that's one of the first things I would challenge you in vision implementation.
Yeah, and the best way I think to go about that with your lead pastors to and I'm jumping into some of the stuff you just following, but I'm speeding this section up. But is really take time to get to know and understand the heart behind the vision. You're going to do that in relationship with your lead pastor. Really feel like you understand. It's going to be hard to move in the same direction with something that you don't really fully understand. You may see that. You may see the words, you may hear it in announcements every week and see it printed on the bulletin or whatever, but if you're not really connected to the vision, then and really the heart behind it, then you're going to have a hard time seeing yourself as an extension of that vision. But those conversations with your lead pastor, just like I said a minute ago, don't over worry about spending or asking for time. One of the things that I think is one of my favorite things is when we have staff that really want to dig down deep and understand the why and the heart behind what we're really trying to do. And so those conversations I think are going to be really well received with your lead pastor, just wanting to understand the heart of the church and the vision of the church so that it can be applied in your area.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, if you're struggling to figure out, okay, this vision doesn't make sense to me of where I'm imagining college ministry to go, and then we're hearing this vision. I think what he said is your action step. You sit down with them and you say, hey, I want to hear your heart behind this. I want to understand how you came to this position, because I want to champion, I want to value the things that you're valuing, and I want to make sure we're on the same page. And so then you orient your ministry to value those types of things. Yeah. Which leads us to value.
This is a big one. This is a huge conversation. This is one I very much remember. Jump to ask the question. Yeah, go ahead.
So kind of maybe it's rhetorical, but that then would lead back into the collaboration piece.
Absolutely.
So on the clarifying cool questions, what does it look like to kind of push in the kind of almost like constructive criticism? Not out of like you're tearing down what he believes, but if he's vague or maybe he doesn't understand how to get the college piece. Is that where you can step out and be like, here's an idea, or here's my perspective? Or what is kind of like, like I said, not out of like challenging because you're undermining, but
asking good clarifying questions? What's kind of the difference between
This is a great. It's a really fine line to walk, because you challenge to understand when not done properly can just look like challenge. And so here's kind of a rule that we have with our staff. Don't have questions. If you do not ask a question of a supervisor, don't ask a question that you don't have 3 possible solutions to and a recommendation. And the reason we have that rule is because often we ask questions without having really thoroughly thought through things. And so if you're gonna ask questions around vision, especially as it is application based within college ministry, I'm trying to think of one on the spot, but ask a question that shows that you thought about ways that it could apply to college ministry, and frame the application as the question. So,
Right.
I'll just make this okay. So our vision says da 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 da. So you repeat the vision. Our vision says reach the nations, and I'm working over here in college ministry with these college students. Do you see the work that we're doing in terms of strategy to reach this specific campus? Do you see that as the extension of the vision over here in college ministry? Am I headed in the right direction, organizing volunteers and students to really reach this campus? It seems like that's the case, but could you just help me really understand that element of the vision and whether I'm headed in the right direction? A question like that tells your lead pastor you've really, really thought through it. It's not threatening at all. It gives them the ability to go, let's just say you're in a scenario they've never even thought about how that specific campus might relate to the vision. Now they're going, okay, yeah, now I'm understanding how that really is an extension of the vision. They have a chance to speak into it. They also have a chance to potentially correct that and say, no, I don't know that we need to put resources there. Maybe we need to be looking in this direction. But you've now phrased that in a way that you're going to get to hear more about what that vision really is and the heart behind it. And it's not in a threatening way at all, because you've put some real thought behind it. And so think through the way that you approach that question. Because if you just say, man, I don't really get it. I don't really see, this Reach the Nations deal. I don't know. You got to tell. It's totally threatening, totally challenged. Don't approach it that way. I'm obviously blowing.
Yeah. Or I think where does college fit in this? Can you just tell me? Like that's that
approach
versus I love what he said of like, you've thought about it. You've personally thought, how do I think college fits into this? And now I'm bringing that proposal to him, saying, this is how I'm interpreting this. And this is how I'm personally applying this.
Yeah.
Is this what you're envisioning?
Yeah.
And then working with him from there.
And they're right. That is collaboration. That's great collaboration that you've now initiated, which is
Absolutely.
And I was going to ask literally the same exact question. We come from like a mega church of like 3,000-4,000 people.
Yeah.
Our college ministry is probably like 3 years old. We just got around 60 people, only 30 people are a core. And like if our pastor is extremely disconnected from our college ministry, we're definitely like a small church within a church. But if his very traditional, very conservative, like his college ministry would not simply last in the culture that we live in today. So it's very hard to feel confident enough to not only invite him in for that collaboration, which kind of what you were saying too. Like you don't want to add to his plate, especially if it's just such like a small section. Like we'd be kind of scared. We don't want to ask him to come preach and like only 30 people are there,
Well, let me ask you this: who's your staff representative?
Our staff. I don't want to like tattle on Dad. That's kind of what it's.
Okay.
Oh no, I don't think he's asking. I think he's saying like who would be like who do you report to? Like what's the title?
We're college pastor.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what I was trying to say. Just attention recording. I was all right. Here's what I want to tell you. I think the way you're processing and thinking through things, it's good because there's a heart there that desires to learn and to have his influence in the room, where you're acknowledging the God-given position that he has in your community and in your church. What I would really challenge you to do is have a really honest conversation about those practicals with that college pastor and say, hey, tell me why the structure works like this. help me understand the inside behind the curtain that I don't see, because I know there's a method to it. Like if you're a mega church, I promise there's systems and structures. Like, all right, peel back the curtain a little bit. Help me see on the inside. And then I just wonder if your perspective might shift a little bit, particularly in regards to desirable action steps. So I would really challenge you. You take nothing else out of this. Have that conversation with your college pastor and say, I'm just interested about this. Can you tell me about it? And he's going to actually be able to have a great conversation with you because he now knows that world so well. And you're asking him to explain something that he lives in every day. So I think that conversation will be really helpful.
Yeah, and we probably have that conversation like once a quarter.
Okay.
But I do think that it is kind of like that waiting game that maybe just like comes from like insecurity.
Okay.
So thank y'all like just for like giving us wisdom on how to do that appropriately and like with respect and honor towards that leader.
For sure. Yeah. I think we'll get, I think with this value question too, we're going to touch on this because you're kind of mentioning a college ministry that's going to get going or that is getting going. Pay attention here because in just a minute I'm going to talk about perceived value of college ministry. I think it'll be helpful. So let's jump into that last one. And this one is really personal. We'll talk about both sides, personal and practical, a little bit in terms of value. But that's the question: is college ministry valuable in our church? And am I valued? Is all mixed up together. And so we're not going to be able to answer that by just saying, dealing with one and then the other. Those are mixed up together because that's the way ministry works. If you're not fully in and not personally invested in the ministry, you're probably not doing it right. And so, of course, it's mixed up together. So, and I remember this from a college perspective. I actually remember, does our college ministry matter to him? Do I really matter to him? Is he interested in me? Growing as a leader, and that would happen for me at events. We'd have a big worship night or something, and lead pastor wasn't there. It's like, he didn't show up today, and so I wish he would have because I remember that wrestling match. And so here's what I would say, just in terms of the question, am I valued and is college ministry valued? The answer is, you're in the room today. The answer is yes. It may not be a real warm, fuzzy value, and that may be why you're actually in the room today. It may have a little warm and fuzzy, but here's the deal. Your church values college ministry on some level because you have that role. They have given you that role to play, and your lead pastor has a lot to do with that. They are either the ones that brought you on or started the ministry, or they're the ones that are going to bat for you, that are vouching for you continuing to be in that ministry area. And so on that level, I think we need to say, yes, there is value because we are engaged in the work, and we need to judge less on feel and somewhat on just practicality. Okay, there's value. I don't want to start out from being wounded. I want to start out with an assumed value. But here's the other thing with college ministry that is around this conversation of value that's just different, guys, than any other ministry. And it's that just college ministry is tricky for a church to have, for you to perceive the church's value about. And here's why. Think about children's ministry. Is that easy for your church to value? Yes. Why is it easy? Because these are their children. And of course they want you to invest in them. And when you do, they're like, yes, totally, we'll throw money at that. We will invest, we will give time, we'll volunteer, whatever. I know nursery volunteers are hard, but for the most part, we'll volunteer, we'll do the VBSs, because it's our kids. We know their stories with their families. Think about youth ministry. It's the same thing, right? Of course, we're going to pay for camps and we're going to be all in and these are our kids. We saw them when they were back at VBS and whatever. Is adult ministry value? For sure. Like, everybody wants to be at a church where you're being fed and where you're growing. So adult ministry gets a lot of value, and it's easy for people to see why we're doing that. Then you get into college ministry, and college ministry is tricky, and here's why. Most college campuses, regardless if it's a commuter school or not, most college campuses kind of have their own rhythm and orb. Like students typically stay within the world of the campus. And so the people at your church are not interacting with college students on a day-to-day basis that they're aware of. Now, they're getting, their coffee's being handed to them by a college student, but they're not thinking like, I'm interacting with a college student. So they have no real awareness of interaction in their normal day-to-day life. Even in cases where, I love that we've got volunteers here, you're going to have adults in your church that may get super serious about college students and love it and buy them, and that's a fantastic gift. But even think about that. Their relationships with college students are really short-lived. You may really connect with a college student. Obviously, every once in a while, there's times where it becomes a lifelong mentorship or something. But for the most part, even your adults are seeing these kids for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years max. But normally it's really like a year to two where there's significant relationship, and then they're gone. And then there's another set that comes in. So value as it relates to college ministry takes a lot longer for a church to really grab hold of. You could value children's ministry. If you started a new children's program, it could be valuable in 6 weeks. People see the impact. The kids are coming home talking about it. Super high value, super quick. College ministry, it takes years, okay? And I'm saying that to really try to help your perspective. It takes years and years for a church to really understand the value of college ministry. And oftentimes, the same pace that your church learns to value college ministry will be the pace that your lead pastor learns to value college ministry. Not all the time. That's not always the case, but typically the rest of your staff and your church will learn it over a long period of time. And that's the reason why you feel alone, because people are like, we're doing this thing, and there's some cool things that are taking place, but they don't really know how to interact, and it's just harder to see the value. But stay at it. It just comes over longer periods of time.
Yeah. So some practically, how do you respond to that, right? And I think we have to acknowledge that for majority of our church staff, and also just for our congregation, college ministry is invisible to them. It's something that happens when they're not here. Our worship nights start at 8 p.m. You know how many people in our congregation are in bed by 8 p.m.? It just happens when they're not. Yeah. And so one of the things that you have to do is you have to work with your lead pastor. And this seems not like with your lead pastor or with your direct report, but I would argue it actually is. Work with your lead pastor and talk to them about how they think you could increase visibility of college students and college ministry in your church. So you might say
but come with answers. Don't just come with answers.
Yeah.
Your thoughts.
So some ideas that you could jot down for that conversation. Be like, hey, can college students read the scripture on Sunday morning? Hey, can they pray over the offering? Can college students be greeters? Can they pass out bulletins? What are the church-wide functions? And I want you to value those and then make sure college students are present and visible in them. And what that will do is that will help your whole congregation value college ministry. And so often what happens is that college ministers value the college gatherings and undervalue the church gatherings, the church-wide gatherings. And what you're fighting against that by placing the college students in those gatherings and saying, how can we increase visibility there so the church sees them serving and they're aware when they're not there. I think you do the same thing with integrating adults into college spaces. But then you can also have that conversation with your lead pastor and just say, hey, I'd love to just share some wins using the language of your vision statement, right? I'd love to share some wins that are happening in our college ministry. What do you think is the most appropriate way for us to do that? Because he cares about the wins in college ministry, and he cares about communicating wins to your people. That's something he's cares about. And if you just say, I'd love to know how to do this, you're not getting him on board and on the same progression, the same page.
Last thing I'll say about that is that goes the other way is look for ways that you can invite your lead pastor into college spaces so he can firsthand see and interact with and appreciate value. But do that in ways, and this is kind of to some of your question, do that in ways that are shaped around his giftings. So I trust John to do this, but one of the things I tell John is, listen, on a yearly basis, I need for you to tell me what spaces do I need to be in, because I want those college students to look at me as their pastor. I don't want them to disconnect me and John, and I want them to see me as their pastor. But I'm also pastoring a much broader group here. So I told John, you tell me what rooms I need to be in that utilize my giftings and also have the largest relational impact on our college students. And so you might think, well, okay, if we have a worship night and a bunch of kids come to that, maybe I need to be there because I'd be visible. The problem is it's not very relational. And so John has actually put me more often in their leadership development places. They have a retreat once a year where in the summertime we prepare for the school year. And so John will have me come and teach 3 or 4 sessions to a group of 40 to 50 instead of a group of 300 or whatever, instead of the large gathering, because then in that time I'm super connected with those leaders and I have time to dialogue with them and get to know them. And that allows for then that to ripple out into the larger group. But that also allows for me to understand what's going on in college ministry so that I continue to value it. He's put me in that position. With your pastor, if your pastor, well, let me just say, if your pastor is better in a small discipleship scenario, then put him in that position. Go to your pastor and go, man, I've got a group of, I know you got a lot going on, but I got a group of 2 or 3 guys that I think you would just be a phenomenal input in their life, just in discipleship. Is that possible? Do you think you could take some time and mentor them? That may be a great space for your pastor. It may be more of a platform, but are you strategically putting them in places where they can see the value and then contribute? And that'll go a long way in your relationship, but also in the pastor's valuing of college ministry. But that's another thing you're initiating.
Yeah, we can talk about that for a long time, and there's honestly much more we could say. I want to move into a time of Q&A with you guys. So yeah, let's go there.
Going off of having your students in other spaces, so one thing that I've wrestled with is you stack up like attendance numbers, for example, because they're like, oh, you only have X amount of numbers. So you're like, all right, let's build that.
Sure.
But then meanwhile, every person is always looking for more people to serve. So if serving is how you get your students out and throughout the whole congregation, but then by having them serve, then it looks like you have a small ministry. That's kind of what I go back and forth on, is like either have low numbers and then the ministry gets kind of like slided, or you kind of huddle and then you don't have the feel.
And you're talking about feeling slighted in the midst of having a conversation with your lead pastor, or just in general?
In general, just because obviously numbers tell a story. And so whether it's budget or salaries or, just fueling a ministry, you want to invest in the ministries that are large and active and present, stuff like that. So it's kind of like going back and forth of like, we want the leaders serving and we want our students across the whole church. But then you also want to make sure that they like get the feel and the raw number of like, oh, there is presence here too. Right.
Yeah. I think simple answer to that, you're going to have to collaborate with the rest of your staff, but differentiate between times that are going to be heavy college student serving times. Yes. Maybe that's the Sunday morning gathering. Maybe that's the 9:30 Sunday school hour, and that's where you're going to have a bunch of college students. And don't layer on your discipleship, your most effective discipleship programming. Don't layer that in at that time where they're going to serve. Because this isn't just a numbers thing. This is also unique. Yeah. They need to be nurtured and discipled. And so if you're doing that, but also asking them to serve at the same exact time, you're creating. So try to differentiate those spaces as much as you can. If they're and ask your lead, hey, I'm caught between 2 things. We're really relying on college students here, and I love that. I want our church to experience college students serving, but I'm also then not able to really invest in them. So how can I differentiate the two and try to have those in separate environments?
Yeah. But I think you got to check your motive here. You got to make sure that your motive is to invest, and that your motive is to help bring about spiritual maturity in your college students' lives, and not just to increase the total amount of people at the gathering. And because we're being real, we gotta check that in ourselves. But like, so for us, Wednesday nights are big serving opportunities. And so the main thing for college ministry is our home groups. And our home groups never happen on Wednesdays as a result of that, because we cannot overlap in that. So I think that's a good point as well. All right, what other we got? Questions? Let's go. This is good.
I have one. How important would y'all say is like your personal bond beyond ministry? I know ministry and life are super intertwined.
Sure.
And I think it's something that like I've found in myself, especially being on like the largest church staff that I've ever been part of in my time of ministry.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of, we're friends, but like we're friends because we're on a mission together, and like I guess we don't prioritize the time beyond church and mission nearly as much as maybe you would think if you worked on staff. But it's kind of like, I don't know. Does that question make sense?
I want to ask a follow-up question.
Go for it.
Do you find yourself longing for deeper, like, close Jonathan David friendship? Or are you saying, should we have that, and is it bad that we don't? Which one would you say?
Maybe more the second one,
Okay.
but it's more so because I have a lot of Jonathan Davids in my life that aren't, my boss, right?
Yeah.
I guess a follow up to that for me is like we recently did a strengths finder for the whole staff, and looked at it, and it was actually kind of hilarious. Her husband is our communication minister, and our lead minister, both in the relational category, got like relational qualities are in there like bottom out of like 30.
Yeah. That's good.
So mine and a few others, like relationships are way up high, which for me it's much more like I'm a positive person. I like to develop people. Like I'm relational, but for a purpose, kind of. I'm not necessarily like craving just let's sit and talk all the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's the nature of me and my lead minister is like he's not relational. Like that's like he's an introvert.
Yeah.
Give him his books, give him his time, give him a stage every now and then. Let him share what he's been diving into and what he's been learning. But anyway, it's just trying to think through that because I don't know. I don't want it to be like a surface level. To your point, like checking your motive. I don't want the motive to be like, just so that I can, accomplish more in this ministry. That's why I'm coming to you and building this relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I guess like some of that is the bond. And whenever I say that, I'm really talking about deepening trust, right? So like if I come to you and ask as the lead minister, hey, what do you think of this in terms of the vision? And I'm kind of touching on some things that you've poured your heart into and you've set your mind and heart to, and say that God's calling me to this. I think hopefully it would come across maybe better if I've built the trust with you so that I'm on your side, right? Like that I've built up that relational equity. But then again, maybe not so much for the guy who's not as relational. So
Yeah, I wouldn't. There's a difference between having a healthy relationship and having a deep relationship. You can have a shallow and toxic relationship, but it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like you're not best of friends, but it sounds like you have a healthy relationship. Yes. Yeah. And if that's the case, I wouldn't worry about it not being deep as a measure of health. It's okay that it's not deep. Best explanation. I wish I could remember who said this, but best explanation I've ever heard is just people are like Legos. They got certain amount of, and some people are like the giant landscape Lego that has
The green one.
dots, and the green one it can connect with. So and then I'm like the one. I do really 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 deep, but with a very tight circle. And so that depending on who they are and depending on who you are, that may be the case, but that doesn't mean it's unhealthy. And so I wouldn't measure that as health or not health.
Yeah.
I think it was okay.
Yeah, I think that's also good. I think you also just don't hold him responsible for friendship expectations that y'all haven't talked about.
yeah, totally.
And I just feel like that needs to be communicated. We often just like have this expectation of what it's supposed to look like, but y'all haven't actually talked about it. And so now where we at and it just gets, you get in your head and you get overcomplicated it. Instead of just being like, no, it's healthy. And if I want a deeper relationship with him, I'll invite him more into my life. Yeah.
And you be you too. I mean, if the way you ask questions is more relational, like don't worry about that. That's okay.
Absolutely.
That's okay. You be that's okay. Other questions? We got no more minutes.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I don't want to leave you if you got burning questions.
in the moments where you may not be exactly on the same page, where you have different ideas of moving forward, what is from a college pastor's perspective, what's a gentle and loving way and an honoring way to disagree?
Well, we've never experienced that before, ever. So I don't know.
Yeah, so I think I talk about that one a little more. So there's a couple moments that Ken and I haven't always agreed. And a lot of that happened when I was young and I needed to grow up. And because if you're not careful, you can just be like, well, he's my boss. I guess I got to do what he says. And you treat him like he's more of a manager than the lead shepherd, if that makes sense. And so it's like, all right, well, whatever. I guess I just got to do it. I would guard your heart against that because that's going to create division and distance. I do think there is a healthy way where you can communicate. I actually see it this way, and I think maybe a good thing for us is this way. And as he dialogues with you, if in that dialogue he's hearing you, but then being like, I understand that, but this is actually the method we need to go. What you've got to do at that point is what Paul would say is submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And I remember a time I didn't do that, and we had to go in his office and talk about it later that day. And he's like, hey, look, you disagreeing with me was totally okay. It's when we butted heads in a public space that's not okay. And so like the disagreements can happen, but having those, like, I really think differently and working through the nuances of it, let that happen in a closed space. But then eventually needs to come a point, if you've really expressed and you've heard him, I will say your gap will probably move closer if you hear and just listen and express. But if the gap still remains, there's an element of submitting to reverence for the leadership God's placed in your life. And that's not a power trip. It's I don't have to have my way here.
Let me pray for you guys, and then we'll stick around if you want to ask more questions. I want to let you go. God, we just pray that you would bless the relationships in this room. God, we pray for health and cohesion. Pray for unity that comes from the Spirit. God, I just ask that you would bless the ministries that are here and these leaders. I pray that their roots would go down deep in relationship with you, and that you would give them strength as they go about the task of walking faithfully in the call that you've given them. We just pray blessing over them in Jesus' name. Amen.